Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 727, on the 11th of September 2022. And there's a date we pause to remember as we pause to remember the historical week that's just been. No matter what your opinion on Queen Elizabeth, the monarchy, and many other issues, I think we can all agree this has been an historic week. Events that have not been seen for 70 years are now playing out more or less live on television. With that in mind, I thought we'd begin today's episode with a look back at some of the predictions, so-called psychic predictions, psychic insights, or maybe gained through astrology or something like that, regarding Queen Elizabeth II. Now, these were collated and analysed during the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project. We discover what the psychics, the seers, the diviners, and so on, wrote about the Queen over the last 20 years. After that, we have the Australian Skeptics Newsletter, read by Adrienne Hill in Canada. Yes, it all makes sense. Followed by the Book of Tim, Part 3 of the series of The Story of the Unicorn. What a fascinating series this has been so far. I've certainly learnt a lot about the unicorn and the mythology and so on. Then we have another skeptical poem by our late friend Jim Wilshire. Well, is it a skeptical poem? It's sort of a paranormal, supernatural, spooky, scary poem this week. Beneath a Black Balloon. Then we go back to the Trove archives and have a look for the term, another term you don't hear much anymore, telepathy. Now, another thing that I will mention at the top of the show is that this marks 14 years of the Skeptic Zone this week. 14 years. It's strange to think that undoubtedly some of you listening right now are younger than the show. It's astonishing, it really is. So happy 14 years to the Skeptic Zone. Now, just reflecting on the fact that we have a new king, and undoubtedly in the weeks to come we will be reflecting upon some of his activities as Prince of Wales, because to our way of thinking, he has not always been the champion of science and reason. And I think Edzard Ernst certainly has a lot to say about that. So we might be looking at that in the future, a little bit down the track. I guess one thing you can say, he's a well-travelled man. He certainly would have a great deal of knowledge of geography and the environment. He is known to be a greenie. Is that the right term? I guess we'll discover more as the weeks and the years go by. But anyway, now it's time for me to run downstairs and have a nice cup of, well, let's just have a nice cup of tea. While I do that, I hope you enjoy the Skeptic Zone. Only a matter of hours ago, the world heard of the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, and now those of us in the Commonwealth countries, well, some of the Commonwealth countries anyway, have a new king, King Charles III. But on this very significant historical day, I couldn't help but think of some of the predictions that we covered in the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project dealing with Queen Elizabeth II. Queen Elizabeth II was a favourite of the psychics, the so-called psychics, in the database of the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project, with a total of 26 predictions concerning the late monarch. However, of the 26 predictions made, we marked none as being correct outright. 22 were wrong, 3 were expected events, and one was simply too vague. According to the psychics and the seers and the prognosticators and the astrologers that we covered in the project, the Queen was either to die or abdicate in 2004, 2010, 2012, 2013, 2014, 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2025. Let's take a look at just a few of those predictions. Of course, they don't all concern the abdication or death of the Queen. For example, here we have one in 2002 by Kerry Calkins, who wrote, "Another bad year coming up for the Queen, someone mishandling the royal purse." Now, we couldn't find anything to do with that. I guess you could call that a vague prediction, but we certainly couldn't find any match. In 2010, Heather Alexander, writing in the International Psychics Directory, wrote, "Health problems around Queen Elizabeth will mean that the subject of succession can no longer be ignored," which is a ridiculous statement because the succession plans are always in place. "She will likely step down by the end of the year and hand on the reins of power due to health problems." Remember, this was 12 years ago. The successor, in all likelihood, will be Prince Charles. This may, in turn, awaken the Republican debate all over again, resulting in our own president here in Australia. I should have marked that prediction as doubly wrong. Anyway. Also in 2010, Simon Turnbull, who was the president of the Australian Psychics Association, wrote, "Queen Elizabeth is likely to have some health problems which will require her to step down, not necessarily kick the bucket. In order to make this changeover occur, Charles may take over the reins for a short period." Although, of course, as we know, in the last few years, the then Prince Charles and other members of the royal family were taking on more royal duties. There was nothing even approaching a regency. In 2012, Brett Vollis, also writing in the Australian Psychics Directory, wrote, "The Queen will become ill late next year and there will be talk of handing over the crown in 2013. Also that year, Lauren Jeffrey wrote, "The Queen will hand the throne over to William in late 2012, which, of course, she could not constitutionally do even if she wanted to." It seems Simon Turnbull had a change of mind by 2014, where he writes, "Queen Elizabeth may do the unthinkable and agree to abdication so her eldest son can stop growing tomatoes." We skip forward a few years to 2018. Georgina Walker, writing in New Idea magazine, Queen and Philip, "I see steps, and the Queen is walking backwards symbolically. I sense it means she is backing away, stepping down from her royal duties as monarch. I see a fall that may expedite these plans. And I see Charles rushed in to take control. I see a black flag flying over the palace. This is symbolic, indicating a passing of a significant royal. August flashes up as a major time in the royal's future. I hear Sandringham will be my forever home." And of course, in 2018, nothing in that prediction matched at all. And we have sort of variations here. In 2019, Julie Mackenzie on a YouTube video predicted, "Queen Elizabeth, Queen's Christmas speech 2019. There may be talk about pregnancies," which there wasn't. Julie Mackenzie also said in the same YouTube video, "The Queen to get sick and die in 2019 or early 2020. Julie Mackenzie also predicted that there would be a ball at Buckingham Palace for everyday people. The Queen would be too unwell to attend. Well, of course, what none of them foresaw was COVID, so there were no balls at Buckingham Palace in 2020. She also predicted the Queen would not make a Christmas speech in 2020. The Queen certainly did. In 2020, Rose Smith predicted, "The Queen is going to abdicate. She's going to hand the crown. I believe it's not to Charles, but it will be Prince William. Once again, these people have a poor understanding of the line of succession. I could only see the back of the head, so it was hard to tell for sure, she said about her vision. I saw her take the crown off the back of her head and hand it to a man, and I think it was William. It's likely to be within 12 months, maybe 2 years. Let me see, that prediction was made on the 19th of October 2019, so it doesn't match in any form. And one last one here for 2020 by Sarah Yip. I see the Queen leaving the spotlight by May-June 2022 and retiring by 2023 to 2025. She will be the ripe age of 99 years old. Age 99 is a milestone in her chart where she is due to experience the rewards of her career to date. Well, Sarah Yip, I suggest you recast your chart and look again. Those are just some of the predictions of the 26 we have catalogued concerning Queen Elizabeth II. I think my next task would be to go through and see what we can find for King Charles III. You can hear all about the Great Australian Psychic Prediction Project simply by visiting www.skepticzone.tv, and right at the top of the page is a link to the episode where, together with Adrienne Hill, I read out the entire report.
Hello everyone, this is Adrienne Hill from Canada here to read the highlights from the Australian Skeptics Newsletter. This is newsletter number 156. You can subscribe to this newsletter and get it delivered to your inbox every other week, complete with links to all the stories. Just visit www.skeptics.com.au. But now, let's see what Tim Mendham has for us this week. Hi all, says Tim. Skepticon 2022 will be with us in a few months, and due to the changed date, the early bird price discount has been extended until September 14th. And keep an eye out for the social events to be announced soon. Friday night get-together on December 2nd, and the convention dinner on Saturday, December 3rd. I wish I could be there. Further details and ticket sales are available on the Skepticon website, www.skepticon.org.au. Meanwhile, not a lot in this newsletter on the world of the paranormal. Uri Geller must be having a break. Read on. Tim. Okay, Tim, we'll do just that. Skeptics Archival Videos. Some of Australian skeptics' investigations that were filmed for TV over the decades are now online at the Australian Skeptics YouTube channel. They include James Randi in Australia, dowsing challenges, a water polarizer, power balance tests, and something on breast hypnosis. Whatever that is. Oh dear. Just visit tinyurl.com/YC7XN3RA. Hope you had your pen handy for that one. Reclaiming Medicine Anti-Vaxxer Conference. This event was on last Saturday, a gathering of largely anti-vaxxers wanting to, quote, reclaim medicine, end quote, is kind of like a creationist convention wanting to reclaim science. Paranormal researchers and quantum physics. This article, in what is generally a pro-paranormal site, looks at how psychics misuse and misunderstand concepts from quantum science in their attempts to explain and or justify their worldview. A short summary of what is a very complex field. And, quote, spooky action at a distance, end quote, doesn't mean supernatural. Movie effects in paranormal videos. In this video, two movie visual effects artists look at a number of popular reported UFO sightings and debunk their use of visual effects technology. As they say, quote, if they're out there, This ain't them, end quote. Quite fun and fascinating, especially if you're into visual effects and movies. And, of course, UFO clips. Canberra Skeptics AGM, an important event. Canberran Skeptics will be holding their annual general meeting online on October 25th from 7 till 8 p.m. This will be an important one as it may have an impact on the Canberra Skeptics' very existence. Only paid members of Canberra Skeptics can vote or nominate for a role. If you have not already done so, please join now to play your part. Revealing a New Universe, Perth, September 22nd. Professor Paul Davies, AM, best-selling author and cosmologist, and Professor Tamara Davis, AM, astrophysicist and TV presenter, will be giving a presentation to, quote, take you on a journey to the frontiers of knowledge, from the most profound questions about the universe to years of groundbreaking discoveries of black holes with gravitational wave detectors. Our experts will have you enthralled with every big question on the agenda, end quote. This is an in-person event at the Octagon Theatre, Uni of Western Australia on Thursday, September 22nd from 6 to 8 p.m. Adult tickets are $10 and concession is $5. The September issue of The Skeptic magazine will be out very soon with a major look at the mysterious and often secretive world of organized exorcism in Australia, and not just from the Catholic Church. Plus, the latest on our Hall of Shame for alt-med practitioners, dowsing priests, and of course, frogs. We also have a Hold the Front Page report on a so-called psychic detective involved on the margins with the recent Chris Dawson murder case. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time to do so. You can sign up for a hard copy or digital edition, or both, because the digital is offered free to those who take up the hard copy version. Contact the editor if you're not sure if your existing subscription needs renewing. Skeptics in Action. If you have any ideas for stories or want to contribute to Skeptics communications, such as the magazine or Facebook page, or just have something you want to get off your chest, then you're welcome to get in touch. News leads should be sent to newstips@skeptics.com.au. Submissions for the magazine should go to editor@skeptics.com.au. Comments and suggestions should also go to editor@skeptics.com.au. Well, that's all for now. Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill signing off from Calgary, the home of many haunted places and ghost tours. In fact, one tour is even suitable for children, as long as they don't have nightmares. The Australian Skeptics Annual National Convention, Skepticon 2022, will be held on December 3rd through 4th, the first weekend of December. Go to the ticket sales page at skepticon.org.au to choose full in-person, one-day in-person, or streaming options. The event will be held at the National Library of Australia. The theme is Skepticism in a Changed World, and the lineup of speakers includes Claire Klingenberg, President of the European Council of Skeptical Organizations, the hosts of European Skeptics Podcast, and live stream talks by Skeptics Guide to the Universe host, Dr. Stephen Novella, and Skeptoid host, Brian Dunning. There is also a wide variety of domestic speakers, including Major General Mike Ryan, retired, who will be speaking on science fiction and security professionals, author David Dufty on Radio Girl, ACT Academy of Sport psychologist Christine Dunn on superstitions in sport, controversial author Clive Hamilton on being censored, and many more scientific and skeptical topics. For full details, visit skepticon.org.au.
And now, a reading from the Book of Tim with Tim Mendham.
My name's Tim Mendham. I'm Executive Officer of Australian Skeptics and I'm editor of our magazine, The Skeptic. And today I'll be reading part 3 of an article on unicorns that was first published in the magazine in 1994. But as it's a classic, we reprinted it in the issue March 2015, which is volume 35, number 1. You can download this article in the magazine from our website for free. Now we're going to look at medical benefits, supposedly, and get into the gritty end of the story about scientific looking at the claims. The unicorn has been based variously on the bull, antelope, goat and horse, with solid or cloven hooves. In Muslim countries, it was often represented as a dog or wolf. Although the body varies so, the horn is relatively standardised as long, straight and slender, with spiral markings. This suggests that while the artist's model for the body varied, the horn was inspired for all by the same structure, the slender, straight tooth of a male narwhal. The rhinoceros horn has a wider base, is shorter and slightly curved. The narwhal is an aquatic mammal, an air-breathing relative of the whales, living in the bitter cold Arctic seas. From time to time, a dead narwhal will be carried south by the currents to be washed up on some Scandinavian or British beach. Any local rustic finding such a carcass could hardly miss the opportunity for cash reward. Cut the tusk free and voila, one rare unicorn horn for sale. Narwhal horns were rare, but they were just enough to keep the legend going. The rarity of the horns must have added value to their allure. Certainly, they were greatly valued for their prestige, for their medicinal powers and for their anti-poison properties, which we covered in part 1 of this article. Not surprisingly, only kings and princes could afford even a little one. The King of Denmark in 1600 was so very rich and powerful that he sat on no less than a throne built of unicorn horns. The unicorn horn was known as the alicorn, therefore avoiding the repetitious name. Many different horns from black bucks, other antelopes and so on were passed off as alicorns whenever a profit could be made. The true alicorn, known as a unicornum verum, was found in the ground. These are actually the enduring tusks of long-dead mammoths and were greatly prized until doctors and patients lost their faith. The false alicorn, Unicornum falsum, from the narwhal and available in larger quantities, was strictly distinguished in Northern Europe. The value of the unicorn horn lay not just in its rarity, beauty, or mystical associations, but in its reputed medicinal potency. Saint Hildegard in the 12th century first ascribed magical medicinal properties to the unicorn. These powers were later transferred from the animal's body to its unique horn. It was the treatment of choice for epilepsy, impotence, barrenness, worms, the plague, smallpox, and other diverse ills. The unicorn horn turned bad to good. Eat a little finely powdered horn and almost any disease will be cured. Or fashion a cup from the horn and any poison in your drink will be neutralised. Older, incorruptible materials like gold and ivory also had these supposed magical, wholesome attributes. As to the price of a unicorn horn, some valued it weight for weight as equal to gold. Others valued it at 10 times their weight in gold. And with value comes crime. Apparently, in 1303, a monk in Westminster stole a unicorn horn. To deter repetitions, King Edward I ordered the monk's entire skin to be separated and tacked to the wall near where the theft had occurred. Of course, any medicine containing unicorn horn would be expensive, but then the very expense of a medicine was proof of its value. A husband could hardly begrudge his sick wife the benefits of unicorn horn medicine, even if they did both suspect that recovery and the unicorn's horn medicine were unrelated. Just coincidence. And if the medicine didn't work, never mind, it's always worth trying, just in case. The expense of the medicine proved the husband's love and the wife's value. As we've already found, the unicorn was love. In China, the unicorn was that Asian single-horned rhinoceros, and the rhinoceros horn was greatly treasured. The rhinoceros horn is still believed to have some of these properties today, not so much for its medicinal properties as for its aphrodisiac powers. Indeed, the desire for the aphrodisiac properties of the rhinoceros's horn and the willingness to buy it for exorbitant amounts of money is a major incentive for the illegal hunting, threatening the continued survival of the species. Fortunately, the dishonest substitution of African rhinoceros horn, this species has 2 horns, as the real thing has relieved the pressure on its Asian cousin, an example of dishonesty producing a more desirable outcome. Obviously not very good for the African rhinoceros, though. We have then the personal experience of travellers, the authority of the Bible, and rational argument producing support for other areas such as the zodiac. What is the individual left with other than intuition? Do you believe in the unicorn or not? Lewis Carroll parodied the power of intuitive belief in Through the Looking Glass, where he said, "And he, the unicorn, was going on when his eye happened to fall upon Alice. He turned round instantly and stood for some time looking at her with an air of deepest disgust. 'What is this?' he said at last. 'This is a child.' Hagar replied eagerly, 'We only found it today. It's as large as life and twice as natural.' 'I always thought they were fabulous monsters,' said the unicorn. 'Is it alive?' 'It can talk,' said Hagar solemnly. The unicorn looked dreamily at Alice and said, 'Talk, child.' Alice could not help her lips curling into a smile as she began, 'Do you know, I always thought unicorns were fabulous monsters too. I never saw one alive before.' 'Well, now that we have seen each other,' said the unicorn, 'if you'll believe in me, I'll believe in you. Is that a bargain?' 'Yes, if you like,' said Alice. And then science comes on the scene. In the 17th century, medical skeptics, led by sceptical Renaissance Italians, doubted the pharmaceutical value of the unicorn's horn. With the placebo effect recognised as the cause of many claimed cures, doubt entered. With the seeds of doubt, doctors and their patients lost their faith. Without faith, the unicorn's horn was valueless. Serious books established that opinion and its use declined. Powdered unicorn's horn had been included in the British Pharmacopoeia for nearly 100 years from 1651 to 1741, but was omitted from the 1746 edition. And Tony Wheeler, the author of the book, says, "Of all the benefits of science that I would like my students to learn, an understanding of the placebo effect would probably be more personally valuable to them throughout their lives than any other in these days of rampant pseudo-medicines." The reality of the animal diminished as the continents were explored without the unicorn's home being discovered. The explanation of the mystery of the unicorn's horn began with the realisation that Columbus's West Indies, and America generally, are not India, and continued with the subsequent search for the Northwest Passage to India. Sailors exploring the Northern Atlantic and Arctic Oceans saw the living narwhal, and their descriptions exposed the narwhal's tusk as the major source of the unicorn's horn. At about the same time, the past existence of mammoths as the source of Unicornum verum, or true horn, was being appreciated. Disbelief in the unicorn spread slowly. The recognition of the narwhal did much damage to the legend, and the exploration of the dark continents left less and less land for the mythical beast to survive in. The fundamentalist believers in the infallible Bible clung to the unicorn rather than accept that any word in the Bible may be wrong. Nevertheless, the unicorn's decline was well underway by 1700, though disbelief in the medicinal powers of the unicorn's horn took a little longer. In 1827, Baron Cuvier, a prominent and respected zoologist, declared that a unicorn is biologically impossible. His reason was that in all cloven-hoofed animals, the separate bones making up the skull meet and fuse in the middle of the forehead. This junction is called a suture. It is the gap between these forming skull bones that gives the newborn baby its soft spot in the centre of its skull. Because the bony horns of cattle, goats and others grow out from the skull bones, and because such an outgrowth could not arise from a suture, Cuvier declared the single-horned animal impossible. The rhinoceros does not count here because its horn is not bone, but very densely compacted hair. Cuvier was wrong, however, about how the horns grow. Horns do not grow out from the skull bones. Instead, they grow from a horn bud in the soft tissue covering the skull bones. The horn grows from this bud forward to form the horn, and backward to fuse with the skull bones behind. With this pattern of growth, the type of skull bone behind the horn bud, suture line or not, may not be important. Maybe the growing horn will fuse just as well with sutured bones as in the middle of the bone. Dr. W. Franklin Dove, working at the University of Maine, tested this possibility in 1933. Dove anaesthetised a day-old Ayrshire bull calf, removed its two horn buds, and reinserted the horn buds together in the centre of the forehead over the suture. Instead of the pair of curved horns typical of Ayrshires, this animal grew a single, very straight horn, curving slightly upwards at its tip. And this horn was pale grey at its base and black at its tip. The similarity to the ancient descriptions of mythical unicorns was uncanny. Unknown to Dove, a few years earlier, Dr. Odell Shepherd had described the production of unicorns by a similar operation by African Dinkas and Carrots using cattle and by Nepalese using sheep. One of their reasons for doing this was apparently to mark the leaders of their herds. Maybe they had made unicorns, and maybe some of these animals had been traded to Europe where they had inspired the descriptions by the ancients such as Pliny the Elder. In 1984, the USA's Ringling Brothers Circus exhibited 4 goats with single central horns as living unicorns. These may have been animals created surgically by Dove's method. Animal rights activists protested. So we have seen how personal experience, intuition, rationalism, and authority had all contributed to the unicorn myth, and how then sceptical, untrusting science, with its need for the repetition of observations, its ability to deduce, and its ability to test claims and deductions by experiment, has reduced the myth of splendid magical animals to man-made leaders of the herd. Of all the ways of knowing, of personal experience, intuition, rationalism, authority, and science, only science tests its knowledge. Only with science is the unreliable knowledge discarded and the reliable knowledge conserved. Science has been criticised for its production of false concepts and for its delays in discarding its false concepts. Then only science does test its concepts, and only science does discard those found to be false. If you started reading this article thinking it to be an explanation of the unicorn myths, you're right. But this article is also a demonstration of the power of skepticism through science to produce reliable knowledge. No other way of knowing has this same power. The lack of any reality to the mythical unicorns has been so evident for some that they have used the unicorn as the epitome of an idealistic animal, totally insulated from all exogenous rhythms, as a stand-in for the null hypothesis. Is this then the final fate of the unicorn, to have been reduced to a classical non-animal for the use of theoretical biologists? Never mind. The solitary power of this beautiful animal, with its unbridled love of innocence, continues in our myths. And that's the end of part 3 of this article, which is called On the Horn of a Dilemma. It's written by Tony Wheeler, first published in the Skeptic magazine in 1994 and reprinted in the March 2015 issue, which is volume 35, number 1. And you can download that issue with a whole article and other stuff as well, of course, from our website, skeptics.com.au. Just look for the magazine link. And all of our issues, apart from the last 4, are available on the website for free to download. Pretty good value. But while you're there, why not subscribe to the Skeptic magazine as well? You know it makes sense.
Beneath the black balloon, the storm broke the back of the blackest night, and opened holes with its blinding light. Thunder rumbled from all around as birds took flight from the frightening sound. Brilliant bolts of lightning pointed to the holy house of the unanointed, and dogs howled at the hidden moon behind the clouds like a black balloon. Was it a house or was it a castle, wrapped in the night like a menacing parcel, waiting in the darkness for who would call on the darkest night of nights of all? Castle or mansion, it mattered none. This was the home of hobgoblins' fun, the birthing place of a demon's delight, a door to hell where all is not all right. Inside the creaking, leaking walls echoed the sounds of the inmates' calls, stifled screams and blood-curdling yells of people imprisoned in private hells. In the middle of the room a spirit rose, like a see-through sheet in a ghostly pose, with eyes like embers glowing red, in a ghastly skull-like hairless head. The wail commenced with a cello note, played on the guts of a cat or goat, then a scream like the death of violins, tortured for all of mankind's sins. As the apparition filled the void, the castle shook like it was annoyed, and with the spectre welling deep inside, the bowels of the building opened wide. Doors split and the ceiling crashed, walls imploded, windows smashed, the roof came down in a thunderous roar and levelled that castle to its floor. Then mist filled the empty space, with holes for eyes that formed a face of goodness that had done its deed, and claimed the souls of those it freed. For now the spirits never linger, never stare or point their finger at the ruins where the ravens croon, in stormy skies beneath a black balloon.
Again, here we are looking in those pages at Trove archive. Trove, indeed, of digitised newspapers going back many decades into centuries here in Australia. Sometimes we look around the world. Today we'll be looking at Australian newspapers, and our search term is telepathy. Now, what does Wikipedia have to say about telepathy? Telepathy, fictional, magical phenomenon. Well, that certainly doesn't beat about the bush right from the start. Feeling, perception, passion, affliction, experience. The term was first coined in 1882 by the classical scholar Frederick W. H. Myers, the founder of the Society for Psychical Research. It has remained more popular than the earlier expression thought transference. This is quite a lengthy article, but towards the bottom it says scientific reception. A variety of tests has been performed to demonstrate telepathy, but there is no scientific evidence that the power exists. A panel commissioned by the United States National Research Council to study paranormal claims concluded that, quote, despite a 130-year record of scientific research on such matters, our committee could find no scientific justification for the existence of the phenomena, such as extrasensory perception, mental telepathy, or mind-over-matter exercises. Evaluation of a large body of the best available evidence simply does not support the contention that these phenomena exist. End quote. And our first return comes from the Courier Mail in Brisbane, dated the 18th of September 1947. Telepathy has science thinking. Most scientists still feel a tiny bit skeptical of telepathy. The lecturer in psychology at Queensland University, Mr. G. Naylor, said yesterday, commenting on a report in yesterday's Courier Mail that a symphony concert in Holland had been ruined by a man exercising telepathic power on the artists to win a bet. Mr. Naylor admitted that the evidence was excellent. Seems to be a strange thing to do, but there you go. Position clouded. The position of telepathy in science was clouded, he said. Earlier this year, we conducted certain telepathic experiments in the cutting of cards with senior students at the university. At the end of the experiments, all students presented would have unhesitatingly signed sworn statements that telepathy had been practiced. And then it says here in another quote, and bold and in italics, the experiments seemed foolproof, yet, in actual fact, they were not. Then we go back. Conscious faking in the Holland case seemed most unlikely, Mr. Naylor continued, as it was not probable that two artists would play badly merely to permit a man to win a bet which would not equal the fees they received. It reminds me of Hyman's maxim. You don't investigate something until you're sure there's something to investigate. And who knows what happened at the concert, if anything happened at all. Stopped train. Now the Dutch telepathist has been at it again. This time he stopped a train in a new experiment in thought control. A message from Trevor Smith, the Courier Mail's London correspondent, says that when a train suddenly stopped between Dordrecht and Rotterdam, the guard found a man staring fixedly at the communication cord. He admitted having pulled the cord, but said, "I don't know why, I just had to pull it. Something drove me." Another man in the compartment said, "I am responsible. I wanted to see if I could will the other fellow to pull the cord, and it worked." Hardly what we would call compelling evidence for telepathy or mind control. Now we come to The Sun from Sydney, published in 1947 on the 13th of July. Padre to You by G. Stuart Watts. Telepathy needs close scrutiny. Even Bible cases, reported instances of telepathy, are always news. People are fascinated by strange, eerie, quote, out of the way, end quote, happenings, and eagerly adopt, quote, supernormal, end quote, explanations of them. Now, there's a term you don't hear much anymore. In fact, not at all. Supernormal. Supernormal. Of course, the most common term is supernatural. Many who speak or write to me on this subject describe experiments which have fully convinced them of the reality of thought transference. I think the utmost caution is necessary here. These remarkable experiments, at first sight, seem to show that minds have been in contact with each other, independently of the ordinary means of communication. But often, when the facts are carefully sorted, it turns out to be a case of coincidence or the working of the unconscious mind, or both. Certainly, coincidence and unconscious processes account for a large number of supposed instances of telepathy. Here is a typical example. Dr. Brill, a noted psychologist, and his wife were one day at lunch in a restaurant. Mrs. Brill suddenly referred to an absent colleague of her husband's at the very time the latter, too, was thinking of them. Okay. It made even the skeptical psychologist think of the possibility of telepathy, until they noticed a man who bore a striking resemblance to the absent friend crossing the room. They had seen this man when they first entered, and after noticing the resemblance had promptly forgotten all about it. But nothing is ever lost in the unconscious mind, and in due course the hidden memory came to light. It is a sound principle of criticism that normal explanations are to be sought and tested before resorting to supernormal ones. And I certainly would agree with that. I believe that if acted upon, this simple, obvious principle would speedily tame down many stories which at present make our flesh creep. First-class conjurers have some illuminating things to say about public demonstrations of thought transference, and I suggest that their opinions should be carefully noted. Well, Padre Watts, you are seeming to be somewhat of an early skeptic. 1947, that's interesting. He goes on. I hold, then, that the case for telepathy is not proven, but urge the fullest critical inquiry into it. If it be objected that the Bible is full of accounts of incidences which can only be described as telepathic, I reply that these accounts must be subjected to the same searching investigation as others. Truth can never contradict itself, and a true religion welcomes criticism. A true religion. An interesting suggestion was made by Freud, who, though skeptical about telepathy, said that if true, its use would mark a return to the past rather than an advance. Ants and other creatures in which the senses have not been specialized seem to communicate with each other by a form of telepathy. The five senses would thus be a great advantage on this primitive method of communication, and our use of telepathy would be a return to it. Nor is there any reason to suppose that thinkers will ever prefer occult information to the reports about the world brought to us by our five wits. Well, thank you very much, Padre G. Stewart Watts. And next we have a very short item here in the Daily Standard from Brisbane from the 19th of July 1927. Telepathy test. About 9 o'clock tonight, a unique telepathy test will be carried out by 4QG. That would have been or still is possibly a radio station, in conjunction with Argus, who is appearing at the Lyceum Theatre. A committee at 4QG will concentrate on a number of objects, and Argus, from the Lyceum Theatre, will advise the committee regarding the objects thought of. Listeners will follow the demonstration with interest. Argus must have been a performer, maybe a mentalist. And finally, in a similar vein to the one we just read, but this is from 1933, from the Borough Record in South Australia, published on the 7th of June 1933, telepathy test. On May 7, Mr. Harold Morton, General Secretary of the Theosophical Society in Australia, tried a telepathy test with 2GB, and 2GB is a Sydney radio station, listeners on the air. As he explained, it was a more difficult task than he proposed, than the propelling of a stream of thoughts to one receptive individual. Actually, he proposed that listeners should tune in with his thought so they might discover the process of sympathetic vibration, what he was holding in his mind. The symbol which he thought of was a 4-inch triangle drawn in blue pencil. In spite of the difficulty of this experiment, 50% of the listeners' letters mentioned a triangle. Some of the triangles were surrounded by a circle or other device. But it was unexpected that so large a proportion should be right or nearly right. In one case, where a mother and daughter were listening in, the mother said she thought it was a triangle. "Of course it was," responded the daughter. "A blue triangle." Ooh, well, how can you argue with such evidence as that? Of course, what we don't have is a transcript of what was actually said during the radio broadcast. And as I've discovered only recently, there is a well-known psychological phenomenon concerning circles and triangles where people will draw a triangle within a circle. But I'd need to research that a little bit more. But dare I suggest, and it's only a suggestion because I don't know, that the experiment ran along the lines of everybody out there think of a shape and a colour. And many people would have thought of a triangle, many people would have thought of the colour blue. Now, of course, I don't think there's any way to retrieve a radio broadcast made in 1933, but it would be interesting to hear it. Now, here's one which is very, very faint. I can barely read it, but we'll have a go. It's from 1927 on the 4th of June from the Camperdown Chronicle in Victoria. Telepathy test fails. Recent arrangements were made for a radio telepathy test. whereby 3 prominent Melbourne citizens concentrated their thoughts in turn upon 5 articles placed before them on a table at the 3LO studio, and their thoughts were broadcast to listeners in, who attempted to name the articles placed in turn upon the table. The articles were 1. Penny, 2. Latchkey, 3. Ordinary pen, 4. Train ticket, 5. Shire map of Bogong. Altogether, 15,221 listeners sent in replies, but only 2 named the penny, 2 the latchkey, and nobody named the train ticket or the Shire map. The third object, the ordinary pen, was more successful, as 140 named it correctly. ESP tests, telepathy tests via the radio. So there we are, a roundup of some of the many examples of the use of the word telepathy or reports on telepathy over the decades. And as I always like to remind you, why not spend a couple of hours in Trove at trove.nla.gov.au and put in your search for no matter what. And you can look up newspapers, magazines, and lots of other journals as well, because, oh yes, you never know what you might find. Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone, and thank you to those people. Thank you very much to those people who continue to support the Skeptic Zone at Patreon or PayPal at skepticzone.tv. Your weekly contributions, sometimes monthly, or your special extra contributions means the show can keep going. It's as simple as that. And just before I go, if you go to skepticzone.tv, there is a link there for information and tickets for Skepticon 2022, which will be held in Canberra on the first weekend of December, and we'll be hearing more about that in the weeks to come. But for this week, this is Richard Saunders signing off from Sydney, Australia. You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian Skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.